If a friend who never really thought about what gets sprayed on their food asked you to explain what you actually do in a sentence or two, how would you put it?
I educate the consumer on what exactly is found on our food supply, that it's not, you're not going to find it on the food labels. You're not going to hear many people talking about it, especially over the last 50 years that we've been stuck in this cycle of using too many chemicals in our food supply. So I alert people, and I also work at the government, work encouraging the government to change their policy to clean up our food supply.
Yeah, so you went for from investment banking and an MBA at Stanford to being known as glyphosate girl. So what did you personally run into that made you drop the path and start digging into what's actually in our food?
I found myself with a chronic disease that really couldn't be solved by Western medicine. And I was so inflamed. I was on three different psychological drugs because the doctor said that it must be a psychological issue, even though my symptoms were rashes, hair loss, stomach problems, like neuropathy. And doctors didn't really have an answer to it until finally someone decided to run blood work on me and found that my vitamin levels were exceedingly low. Low as in a third world country person that hasn't eaten in a long time. And I found out that my gut wasn't absorbing what I was eating. And I gave up gluten and started feeling a lot better. And then I went to a conference at Columbia University where they had a bunch of scientists and doctors meeting to talk about the new epidemic of gluten sensitivity and what was causing it. And I asked, well, are they spraying anything on our wheat and grains before at all, someplace during the growing process that might be causing it? And they didn't know, but someone from General Mills stopped me afterwards and said, oh, yeah, they're spraying Roundup, which has an active ingredient, glyphosate, on our grain right before harvest, and we're eating it. And so that started a big deep dive into understanding glyphosate and different herbicides and farming practices and just how directly they were impacting human health, and in my opinion, are at the base of the chronic disease epidemic.
Yeah, so a lot of people assume if they just wash their produce, they'll be fine. But you say that really misses how glyphosate works. So what is it about this chemical that rinsing doesn't really fix?
There's different types of herbicides, and so some of them are contact, so meaning that you spray it and it just stays on the outside of the leaf or the fruit or the vegetable. And then others are systemic, and that is what glyphosate is. And so it's picked up and actually goes into the cellular structure of the plant. So it's not something that you can wash off, which is a big part of this problem with the pre-harvest desiccation, because it's pulled up into the crop, and then we're directly eating it. No matter how we treat it, no matter how much we wash it, it won't make a difference.
Yeah, so a lot of your argument ties the soil to the human gut. So walk us through that link and how does what happens out in a field really end up affecting someone's body?
It's so fascinating. And I started just from the perspective of, okay, this is on our food, this is a problem, we shouldn't have it on there. And you start digging in more deeply onto the farm, and you realize that it goes far beyond just what it's doing, impacting us. It actually is also killing the soil, which has a biome that is very similar to what we have in our gut biome that really dictates what our health is going to be. It's so critical to have a thriving biome. And so the soil has the same biome. It's impacted in a very similar way as we are, as our gut biome is, by these sprays. And interestingly, in the case of glyphosate, it also works as a mineral chelator, meaning it binds to minerals that you would hope to find in your food. But when the glyphosate gets into the soil, it binds to the minerals like magnesium, zinc, manganese, and it holds on to them and makes them bio-unavailable to the crop that's growing. So now you not only have soil that's dying, and then you have the toxic load as well on the food, but you also have food that's much less nutrient dense because the soil wasn't able to give those minerals and microcrop itself. And we really, if you really look at our population, even if you think that you're eating relatively well, the chances of it having the nutrient level that we should have biologically are very slim.
Yeah, so you've said that regenerative agriculture, it's not niche, it's a matter of national security. So what do you mean by that? And what does a farm that is doing it right now actually look like?
Amazing what the potential is with regenerative agriculture. And there are some farmers, of course, like Gabe Brown, that have been doing it for a long time. For most farmers, this is a new discussion, one that didn't seem possible because you have all of these universities that are the extension offices that tell farmers how they should farm. And that's really, that education has been based on a chemical system now for years, since the GMO was introduced in 1996. So changing the minds and the philosophies behind what a farmer pictures as farming. I'm talking about the GMO corn, soy farmer, and cotton farmers that we have in this country that make up most of the farming land. Is really it's a hard it's a hard job to do. And what's so disappointing is to see that the government just repeatedly doubles, triples, quadruples down on a system that really is bankrupting our farmers and destroying human health. And they're doing this by providing subsidies only to those farmers that are doing this chemical kind of farming. They're not providing that kind of funding for farmers that say, hey, we want to use less inputs. We want to make money. We don't want to be dependent on the government and these subsidies. We want to grow other things. All of those things that are so vital to the farmer's well-being and farmer profitability and national security are really what I am very concerned about. And if you went tomorrow and you said, we're going to put the government, we're going to put many billions of dollars behind regenerative agriculture, and we're going to start giving farmers ability to still make money even while they're transitioning to more soil forward practices and encourage them to spray less in the way of pesticides, it would be game changing. And you look at a country, I know that China, in the case of China and Russia, they're very careful about their food supply. In fact, there's a farmer who I talked to who was the advisor to Putin. He's an American guy, he's a soil specialist. He talked to Putin and was working on Putin's soil in his personal farm, his family farm. And when Monsanto came over and was trying to sell their bucket of poisons, he said, get out of here. If we use all of that, then we're going to be a very sick nation. And now look what's happened. You see a similar thing in China where most of the people are just living off of local farms and they go to their local farm, they pick up their food, bring it back. And meanwhile, the Chinese government is cranking out all these pesticides that we happily buy in the United States and spray all over our food, but they actually have banned them in China because they know them to be harmful to human health. So we are just really screwing ourselves over in what seems like domestic terrorism almost in a way. And that sounds dramatic, except that it's not because we know the extent to which our health is being destroyed by exposure to these chemicals.
Yeah, so this next topic is a bit of a contested area. So the glyphosate is not likely to cause cancer in normal exposure, while WHO, the World Health Organization's cancer agency, called it probably carcinogenic. And juries have sided really with the sick plaintiffs. So for a teenager or someone trying to figure out what to believe, how do you make sense of that disagreement?
And this is what's so hard. That's why I started my original blog, Glyphosate Girl and Glyphosate Facts, because when I first got really into glyphosate in 2017, if you put into Google, does glyphosate cause cancer or any problems, you would see nothing because all of these front groups have been bought by the chemical industry to make sure that narrative stayed quiet. And people like me and others that were criticizing the chemicals wouldn't get much of a voice. And they were able to keep this up for many years, hiding. There are a lot of health ramifications from exposure, but yet that specifically talking about cancer because there were a ton of lawsuits behind it. Glyphosate can cause cancer. And that is what the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which based all of its research on glyphosate on independent studies. There are independent research pieces done with no money that came from the corporations. When you look at how the EPA does their evaluations and they say, oh, it doesn't cause cancer, they base their evaluations primarily on research that has been bought and paid for by the companies that are hoping to get their way. So they're not really, the EPA isn't doing a good job of evaluation because they're just trusting the very companies that they're supposed to be regulating. And that's really where you see the difference. And in fact, I just last March went to this global summit to go over all of the research since 2015, IARC's decision on whether glyphosate causes cancer, and even more so now with this independent research that's come out. You can see it. But there's a whole saga behind all of the manipulation to keep this non-carcinogenic. That there's a book called Toxic Exposure by Dr. Chadi Nabhan, who actually is an oncologist who was a expert witness in the cancer trials that is very intriguing if you want the download.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about this, but you blogged from the first glyphosate cancer trials. So, what did sitting in those courtrooms teach you about how these chemicals stay on the market even after the lawsuits?
First, I want to say that anyone who just feels like, oh gosh, I have something really important to say and I can't get it out needs to just start putting it out there and just start writing and get it out because I didn't anticipate many people reading it. It turned out a lot of people were interested, thank God, because a lot of the things that were going down in that courtroom were terrible. Things like ghostwriting research, and you had the company concerned that the EPA might call glyphosate carcinogenic. And so they hired what some outside scientists wrote the research themselves, but put the outside scientists' names on it so that it was ghost written and then submitted as though it was independent research, not research that was coming from the company. And they've done this many times. And that is a key way that they've been able to keep it on the market. They also have worked in cahoots for years with the EPA directly and with the USDA, not just with glyphosate, but with all of these pesticides. And right now I'm in DC a lot and seeing it firsthand where you can't believe the extent to which our government is owned and run by these chemical corporations that frankly right now are getting very scared because there's so much momentum out there in public awareness about this problem that we have that they are doubling down on more lobbying dollars to try and keep their narrative going.
Yeah, so on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the most urgent, how worried should the average person be about the chemicals in our food and the state of our soil, and why that particular number?
Oh, I would say to me, there is no more important pressing issue to care about than the fact that our food and water is poisoned with chemicals. And to protect your testosterone, your estrogen, your ability to reproduce, I sent glyphosate samples, or I sent sperm samples into a lab to have it tested, and it came back, the semen had glyphosate in it, and that is known to kill sperm. And that is really scary because we're all eating it all the time. And the endocrine disruption that's on behalf of these chemicals, especially glyphosate and atrazine, is something that is so potentially catastrophic and is going to be impacting generations all the way down the line. And I think already you can see it in the fertility crisis that we're having. So many people are needing IVF. In fact, just recently, I think that the head of the military said we need to be injecting if you're low in testosterone, we should inject you with more testosterone. And it's like, why do you think the testosterone these days is so low? It's because of these chemicals exposing. So in terms of a future for America that has normal balanced hormones and is not disease ridden, this could not be more important.
So definitely a 5 for.
Definitely a 5.
Yeah, so what if you have any scientists or people who you think I should interview next? Do you have any recommendations for me?
Yeah, you could talk to Dr. Alexandra Munoz. She's a toxicologist who I work with a lot, and she's so good on that stuff.
Yeah, I'll definitely send you an email with all of the information if you have anyone else. So I think I have 2 more questions. So for a teenager who doesn't really control the groceries in their house, what's one thing that they could do to start protecting themselves or pushing this message forward?
I would go and buy a stainless steel water bottle. So at the very least, and this is talking about plastics more than pesticides, but if there were one step you were going to make for your health, it would be to be decreasing plastics. That's the easiest thing if you're not the one that's buying food for your household, at least be drinking out of the stainless and not plastic. So that would be the number one thing. Actually, number two, go and buy a magnesium supplement and take that supplement because right now, and a lot of people are walking around with anxiety and depression and ADHD, and we simply can't expect to not feel that way if we don't have the core minerals that are supposed to be in the soil in our food in our body. So it makes it really important to get those minerals into your body, and magnesium is a great place to start. If you're anxious and super stressed, you feel somewhat out of control and insomnia, all of that, it really can at least be helped by magnesium. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, so this is the last question. I really like to ask this one to a lot of scientists, basically all I've asked this to. So if you had one sentence to say to the next generation, what would it be?
That's pretty weighty. Spend your money on clean food and clean water.